Welcome everybody. We'll get started in about 60 seconds. We're so excited to have you here with us today for Cooperative Economics We Got Us. We're hosting Baltimore-based artist and activist Alanah Nichole Davis. I'm going to do a brief introduction for her before we get started, but she's going to take you on a beautiful journey in regards to what she's working on and how we can sustain our community during this time. So welcome to NBAF Forward presents Cooperative Economics We Got Us. Alanah is a Bronx, New York born and Baltimore-based performance artist, nonprofit and small business consultant, organizer, and mother of two. In the past 2 years, Alanah has marketed and produced a countless number of events, projects, and campaigns for nonprofits and small businesses that are arts and education and youth focused. She can be heard on WYPR's Spotlight on Station North monthly promoting what's happening on North Avenue in Baltimore, or on her Instagram, where her wit and sharp anecdotal one-liners geared toward helping and healing Black women are posted, shared, and commented daily. Please join me in welcoming Alanah Nichole Davis. If you guys have any questions for her, I'll be managing the chat. My name is Tiffany Latrice. I'm the artistic director of NBAF. I'm happy to make sure you guys are engaged during this whole entire time. I'm really looking forward to this session. So thank you, Alanah, for making time for us. I'm so excited to hear you speak.
Yeah, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you to NBAF for having me today for Cooperative Economics We Got Us. I'm so excited to have this conversation. It is work that is super prevalent right now, amid a global pandemic. We are, facing the novel coronavirus. And there have been so many things going on with regard to that. One of the hugest things that's happening is, there's an economic crash happening. And so, as a community, especially in the Black community, we're having to kind of find ourselves sticking together as per the usual. And so I want to talk a lot about, the importance of social solidarity and collective care, specifically for the arts through the creation of mutual funds for creative communities during a pandemic. And so this first image that you're seeing is actually a commission from an artist who is Black and lives in Australia. And so one of the things that I have picked up on doing since all of this has started is commissioning artists from all over the world to either draw self-portraits or to pull them into work with me to help invigorate, the creative economy. And is actually, so I'll take you into the next slide. And, first things first, I would love to honor our ancestors. We have some powerful, ancestors who have gone on and are, protecting us right now. And so, there are so many things that we can think about. And I love to think about Sankofa, which is the art of going back and getting it and finding out what has come before us. And so I always love to honor my ancestors before I start any work. I also would like to recognize that, we all live on stolen land. And so you can use this website that I've documented here. It's called nativeland.ca to find out, what were some of the tribes that were living on the land that you are currently occupying. And, just again, giving thanks to them for, the work that they did to put into what is our current day civilization. And that's very important, again, in the artisan Kofa. And again, just taking a moment of silence and a moment of, deep reflection, even if you do it on this call or not, or after, for the lives lost due to COVID-19 across the US and globally. And just to set some intentions for this talk, we're going to talk a lot. I hope that, this can be conversational, so feel free to, put your questions into the chat. I know that someone is manning that, and then I will be doing a lot of, talking. So, I hope to have a great time with you guys. We're gonna definitely talk, I said, about social solidarity and collective care and what it means to be starting mutual aid funds, and a little bit about co-ops as well. So we'll go forward. So we already talked a lot about who I am. And so you already got a little bit of this bio. So what I'll tell you about who I am is I'm someone who's very keen on the art of humanity and the art of social causes. And what that means is, I'm still pretty young in my work. There are people who I know who have come before me who, again, I love to honor the work that has come before me, who have been working and doing this work to bring, people together and to build co-ops and to build strong economy, specifically for Black people and artists alike. And so in doing so, I want to go forward and talk about what is cooperative economics. So, cooperative economics is when you, in layman's terms, is if you're taking two parts, right, and you're bringing them together. So when you're building something that's cooperative, it's working with each other. And when you talk about economics, you're not just talking about money, but you're talking about an ecosystem. So you're looking at that root word of eco. What does it mean to be building something that feeds itself, or to be putting two things together that can feed each other? And so African Americans started using cooperative economics from the moment they were forcibly brought to the Americas from Africa. At first, it was for practical reasons, and then they realized that their survival depended on it, working together and sharing resources. They had collected traditions from the African nations and civilizations they came from that they applied in the Americas when they could. So we have some pretty early examples of this way before 1967, which is presented here in this presentation, but we've always been nation builders. We've always come from people who can do a lot with a little bit, super resourceful and super resilient, always thinking about, how we can come together. And so I like to keep that, in present day, as a millennial, as a Black millennial, as a creative. And so I hope that, in your communities, especially amid a pandemic, that you are, finding yourself charged with, taking on a cause, whatever that might be for you. For me, it's the arts. For me, it's the culture. For you, it might be food access. It could be anything. So I'll read a little bit about this example from the early 1967, from late 1960 that I love. The Freedom Quilting Bee was established in 1967 in Alberta, Alabama. It is a handicraft cooperative founded by women and sharecropping families who need to increase and stabilize their meager incomes. The women began selling quilts to supplement their families' farm incomes. In 1968, the cooperative bought 23 acres of land. Can you imagine a cooperative of Black women buying 23 acres of land? They also provided daycare and after-school services for members, children, and others at the sewing factory. Having the cooperative own its own land gave members independence. And so what we can always look forward to in, building a cooperative, also known as a co-op, it's an autonomous association of people who are united voluntarily. So it's not by force, and then it's not by, there are also unions, and so those things are formed when you're a part of, a larger corporation or, a larger employer, and you guys are looking to come together in order to present or advocate for yourselves. But a co-op specifically serves a common economic or social or cultural need, and supports the aspirations through jointly owned enterprise. And so a present example of that, so we've been doing this for a long time, like I said, a present example of that is Mandela Grocery. And Mandela Grocery is a Black grocery co-op that's on a mission to nourish their neighborhood of West Oakland with healthy food, wellness, resources, and collective ownership. They're full service grocery store sources from entrepreneurs and farmers in California with a focus on Black and brown farmers and food makers. So there are many types of these examples. There are many examples of, co-ops and past examples, present examples. And then, co-ops have these different family members, as I like to call them. And one of those things is mutual aid. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So one thing that I love about these examples is that there's not a lot of ego involved in this. And so we live in this present day time where, a lot of time we put ourselves before the work. And I know that, living in the digital age, we get into the taking pictures of doing food drives. We get into, the ethics of what it means to be, either celebrating the work or being braggadocious about the work. And so I think it's important, for millennials especially, and maybe Gen Xers and people, who might be a little bit younger, because I think in movement building, which is also another important lesson, in movement building and initiative building, it's important, that Black and Brown people understand the power that we have when we can come together as a collective, on and off of social media. Communities can be built, just by word of mouth. And, we didn't need computers or slideshows or any of this fancy stuff, that we have now in order to get our point across. We would say, hey, we're going to gather at this time and this place, and everybody would agree on that. And they would just go forward and do that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about present day with vulnerable communities and why they need cooperative economics amidst COVID-19. So what I would define, I don't know what you would define, and feel free to put this in the chat, but a vulnerable community to me, especially when we're talking about what's happening with COVID-19, it's just, it's a community of folks who is underserved, who doesn't have access to a resource they need, a necessity, something that is, inherent for them to live and breathe and work and feel confident in going forward socially and culturally and economically. And right now, Black and Brown people are especially in a vulnerable community, as we do have, a predisposition to certain diseases, a predisposition to lack of food or resource in our neighborhoods. And these are things that are stemming far back, from COVID-19. But, health and social differences, like I said in this presentation, between racial and ethnic groups are often due to economic and social conditions that are more common among some racial and ethnic minorities than whites. There are a lot of white communities who are a little bit more affluent than, what we are in Black and Brown communities. And so here today, what has greatly inspired my work, just as a cultural worker here in Baltimore, Maryland, as I was introduced earlier, is the fact that, I have this beautiful community of arts and culture folks, ranging from arts, health, health and wellness, because I consider that an art as well, and I know that most of them are minorities and that they wouldn't, be eligible because Black and Brown people build movements and initiatives and brands. They don't always have formalized businesses. We're not going to get our 501c3, or it's not as important for us to be getting a limited liability corporation in order to say this is the work that we're doing. So a lot of us remain unprotected, for lack of a better word. And we don't necessarily, we're not eligible for some of the things and the resources that are coming out right now. Right now we have payment protection plans, from the Small Business Administrations. There's different grant funding and things like that that are available to those businesses. And so coming into present day, what has inspired me in finding out about, cooperatives and mutual aid funds, which I'll later go on to describe them as being the cousin of co-ops, is, I was able to start a mutual aid fund on March 13th. I woke up inspired, with an equation of sorts, and thinking about how community and common concern, when you add that to humanity, you get outcomes. When you think about what people need and you ask them and you say, well, if you need money, if you need groceries, if you need, and I reached out to friends, I messaged them, but I also had an application available, where people could apply and people could say, well, this is what I don't have. And so I'll read a little bit of this blurb and then we'll go on to the next slide. Bronx-born and Baltimore-based artist organizer Alanah Nichole, that's me, raises $5K. So I was able to raise $5,000 for artists and freelancers affected by COVID-19 related event cancellations and postponements and venue closures. I was able to help over 100 artists in Baltimore, DC, New York, New Jersey, a few other places, Arizona. It's crazy how far it spread because everyone cared. Everyone was willing, to share what was happening. And so, mutual aid is economics' cousin, is cooperative economics' cousin. And so mutual aid is arguably as ancient as human culture. People in every society and every time period have worked together to ensure their communities can survive. And so, in having mutual aid, you have something that's mutually beneficial. You have a resource or you have a skill that you can leverage, or you can give to people, or that you can pool together to give to people, this is what's called mutual aid. And so, in this case, it was money, because, and even though the amount, as you can see, I put down that folks who received the micro grants range from $25 to $100. That's not a lot of money at all. And I can recognize that, but it's more so about the principle of knowing that someone is there for you in a crisis. And so people want that thread of humanity, and that's what needs to be common when you're providing mutual aid, and when you're talking about building a co-op, and when you're talking about building specifically Black sovereignty across the United States and beyond. And so the folks who receive the microgrants, like I said, range from $25 to $100. And those folks, again, just a vast array, a beautiful community of people, queer and trans folks, non-binary folks, everyone. I talk to each of them individually. And I think it's important anytime you're building something, anytime you're talking about Black movement building and Black initiative building, we're very social people. We love to laugh, we love to dance, we love to cry together. We're very close, and I love, seeing models of that. And I know even there's a friend of mine on this call, Aliyah Muhammad, who, lives very beautifully and very communally, as a mother and as a doula and as a friend. And I love to see those communities built. And I'll never forget one of my first experiences inside of a co-op or inside of a communal living space. I wasn't living there, but I wanted to very badly, because I saw how beautiful it was for people to support each other, and just how simple it was. Something as simple as like a can of beans was bringing an entire community together over a plate of dinner at night. And so, what a beautiful thing it was to see those things. And I remember my first experience with that being on Calvert Street here in Baltimore. There's a house called H House. And at H House, you'll have, several people living there at one time. They might be, working at various nonprofits in the area, or they might be artists. And this is like one of my first times, like I said, seeing it in person. I had seen these types of things on TV, and you're like, oh, it's so cool. But to actually see it in person, it was so inspiring. And so I was able, like I said, to set up that perfect play date, between mutual aid and building somewhat of like a co-op model. And it's not a formal thing. And when I say formal, I mean legal in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of, the taxes and all that stuff. But it is legal to be creating mutual aid funds, and to be creating mutual aid, period. So you can do this, you can do it on your own. And that's what I want to, talk about as I go on. So, like I said, at the many intersections that I'm at, there's just so many things and so many intersections that I think about when I think about my work. And when I'm contemplating how I'm going to move forward. And so, it was very important for me for this to be reciprocal and for it to be rapid. People need help, and people need help now. These applications are very long, and they can be confusing when we talk about, artist relief and things like that. And so I needed the questions to be simple and low barrier. And so if you're creating something yourself, the questions need to be simple and low barrier. People are stressed, their health and wellness is, standing at a threat, their economic wellness within their homes is at a crossroads. And so you should be as supportive as possible when we're talking about, cooperative economics. You're not just talking about the money, you're talking about the tone, you're talking about how you approach the work. And so all of those things are important. And so, and that last slide, it says, Alanah's got us. I thought that was cute. So I want to talk a little bit about the types of capital. And this is a fun example. And so the types of capital are financial, natural, produced, human, and social. And I'll say it again, the types of capital are financial, natural, produced, human, and social. And so the first one, financial, it's clearly the money, the cheddar, the Skrilla, whatever you want to call it. The money is not necessarily, and I don't like to think of this as like a hierarchical thing, because one of the things could come before the other. And that's the fun thing about cooperative economics is, in social design, as it is, which is a lot of what I participate in 365, is, we're coming up with an idea from ideation, bringing it from concept to conception, birthing something. So, when we talk about the types of capital and we look at money, if you have money, most people will say you'll be able to do anything, right? You can do anything with money. You can move about, but like without the proper ideas, right? And a lot of times, in organizations, there's always a lot of organizations are Black led without you even knowing it. A lot of the ideas come from Black people. We are a people, and I know that there are other people who have these wealths and these resources, but we churn ideas out constantly. We're always giving up certain levels of social and human capital too. So I'll talk about, like I said, so if you're talking about like the creation of shea butter, you have like this shea tree, which is where the shea butter originates. This is the origin of where you would get that product. But in order for you to have a shea tree and for you to be able to harvest that, you need to have a maker. And so that maker, in relation to that, is the person who whips the shea butter, and that is what brings value to said shea butter. So you as a consumer, you might not be able to find that tree. You might not be able to recognize it. There could be one in your backyard right now, you wouldn't know, because you're just not as knowledgeable as on that part of it as someone else might be. And so that's why cooperative economics is important, because you'd be pulling someone else in and saying, well, hey, don't you know about shade trees? And if they know about shade trees, then you could say, hey, you could be the maker for this co-op. And you could say, hey, well, I would love to exchange some money to you for you to go to the tree and for you to harvest what is known as the shea butter. And maybe someone else knows how to whip it. And then you have the customers. The customers have the money. And so it's cyclical in that way. It's a circle. It's kind of like the circle of life. And so you could keep those sort of things going for a very, very long time. There are many food co-ops and things like that, as I explained in the example earlier. So if you have any questions about, the types of capital that I just explained, please let me know. Again, it's very important that, any cooperative has many of these components. You want to have money. Yes, you could apply for money, you could get grants, you can get all of those things, but you want to make sure that you have a naturally occurring resource. And whether, like I said, whether that's ideas or whether that's a skill you have to leverage, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, you want to make sure that you have something that you could lend this co-op, or someone or a friend, or whatever it is, a good, a service. So we'll go on. And so I think this to be true, right? Why might social capital be the most valuable? While human capital is like a trait or a skill set, or social capital has everything to do with relationships and network, without those connections, you don't have anywhere to leverage those assets. So in order to do those things, you need to have community trust, common concern, and humanity. And I will say those words over and over again. If you do not have trust, and so it was very important in the creation of my own mutual aid fund that, I was an established, like I said, cultural worker at the time of, me establishing that fund, because I was able to post it, into my social media, or to tell friends, who I knew might be struggling with something as it relates to COVID-19, or whatever you might be facing at that time. So this could be applicable in and outside of what's happening with, COVID-19. Any crisis or any problem that a community is having, you can apply cooperative economics. And so I think social capital is super important, because without the people, without knowing someone, I want you guys to kind of, think of a memory right now. You can put it in the chat, or you can hold on to it. We can talk about it later. But like, think of a time that someone was there for you, how much it meant to you, for you to have a friend in the game, for you to, have someone to lean on, someone to cry, to, or someone to express your idea to. Social capital is very important. And it's very life affirming for you to have someone to be shoulder to shoulder with. You want to be in the work with strong people. You want to be, you want to have someone you can trust your ideas with. And I could trust my community with my ideas. And I don't take that for granted. I would never want to do them wrong. I would never want to do them harm. And even we're thinking about this even more as elections are coming up. You want to think about candidates and you want to be able to trust them. You want to know that when they're in your community, that you'll be able to cooperate with them, that they'll be able to cooperate with you. That if you bring them an idea, they'll be able to bring it to fruition, using righteous ways. And that's another thing that I like to talk about, is making sure that things are honest and righteous. And when I say righteous, I don't want to get into security or, into theology or anything like that. But when I say righteous is, making sure that these things are honest, make sure that, everything that you're doing has a level of transparency about it. And so when you have common concern in a community, you have a sense of humanity about you. You can go forward and organize something really beautiful. And what I mean when I say transparency, because a piece of the story I like to tell about what I organized, when I did my mutual aid fund back in March into early April, is that I didn't use platforms like GoFundMe or Facebook in order to collect the monies. I was able to collect the money on my own, through my Cash App, my PayPal, and through other electronic payment sources. So my community trusted me to hold over $5,000 for them in that time. And it's very important to me to know that they trust me to, hold such a large amount of money and to be able to disseminate that into the right hands. And so, that's a little bit of like old school, like, even with like a church treasurer, you would want somebody in that position who knows what they're doing. One, you would hope that they're good at math and that they're trustworthy. And so that's why, all three of those things are very important. You want that community trust, you want that common concern, and you want the humanity. And so we'll go forward with that. And so I love to talk about these principles. They're some of my favorites. But Ujamaa is extended family, and Ujamaa is Swahili, and you'll also recognize that from the principles of Kwanzaa. And so it's one of the principles of Kwanzaa. I've never personally celebrated Kwanzaa, but I look at these principles and I love, the way they sound. And so the Swahili word Ujamaa means extended family or brotherhood or socialism, right? As a political concept, it asserts that a person becomes a person through the people or community. And so, when you're talking about the people who are in and around, your life, these are the people who are most important, to your work. And so you want to make sure that you have a strong extended family. And so I'm so grateful for my strong extended family. And even now, my new family members at NBAF who are supporting this amazing work. So like I said a little bit earlier, sorry for all the moving around. Like I said a little bit earlier, mutual aid is cooperative economics cousin. And this is my actual cousin. Her name is Jashira Nieves. And, we are both from New York City. She's from the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And I spent a lot of my time in my, younger days there, with my grandmother and with my family. And so I wanted to give some lessons on cooperation, right? And so, Jashira, she's again, and this is like right over there by the Brooklyn Bridge, which, is getting a little gentrified at this point. But, at that time, it was just such a beautiful community to be a part of and to grow up with. And everybody, knew my father, everybody knew my mother. My father's nickname in the neighborhood was Spongy. And so I expressed all of these things to say that, they lived in a close community. And so, amidst a pandemic, you want to think about, what are some of your earliest memories of cooperation and how could you apply them, amidst the pandemic? And so some of my earliest memories of cooperation, was my grandma and my grandma watching all of my cousins from my aunties. And my aunties weren't just my blood aunties. They were aunties from down the hall. They were aunties from other buildings in the project. And so, the project was called the Smith. And so in the Smith, there were plenty of moms, who had grown up with my grandmother, who, she had a role in raising. And so, when we talk about cooperation, those moms had to go to work. And so, when you talk about a grandmother providing childcare at a lessened or non-existent rate, that's a co-op. It's not as pronounced as you would think in terms of like what we think to be formal at this time, but that's a beautiful way to think about community. Or having someone watch your kid and like you give them in exchange a yoga session or a massage session, or like maybe you give them a consult or whatever it is you could leverage. That's important. So I want you guys to take a moment, and I'm gonna wait because we're getting into the question portion. So I would love for you guys to drop in the chat, what are some of your earliest memories of cooperation? So it could be, or you could say it. I'd love for you to turn your mic on and contribute, or raise your hand. I think there's a feature in the Zoom here, but I would love to hear from you guys. I'm so excited, to hear about what are some of the ways and lessons that you have in cooperation. And I'll just wait a few seconds. Anybody, feel free to chime in. If you can't think of any, that's cool. I'll go on to the next slide. But keep that in your heart. Like, what are some of your favorite moments of cooperation, and how do you feel like you could apply that, to what's happening in the world today? And so we'll go forward.
I have one, Alanah, that I would love to share too.
Just please.
Yeah. I think that's a really great question. So I think a lot of times, we kind of sit and we're always like attached to our phones. Something I remember just like growing up is my neighborhood was really close. Like I grew up in Chattanooga and we knew all the neighbors across the street. I would go over their house, take them sugar, get eggs, watch so-and-so. And so that was something that I've been like implementing in my practice. It's just taking care of my neighborhood, my block, checking in on my neighbors, whether it's delivering canned goods or sweets or a baked item, and just seeing where they are and how they're doing with all of this, I think has just brought me closer to just keeping it local, like having a hyper local focus.
I hear that. I love that example. I love the example of like getting the chicken, all that good stuff. That's such a beautiful, and I'm sure it was such a great community, and you have those memories, and like you go forward, in your work, informed by that. And I think a lot of times, we think about, I love to talk about the difference between like formal and informal a lot, but a lot of us went to school or we didn't. And I love to tell this portion of my story, but I didn't go to university. I was expelled from Baltimore City schools or Baltimore schools at 16. And so beyond that, everything I have is self-taught. Everything I have, I learned from community. I went to my first open mics in, 2008. I went there and I was so excited to learn, from some of the people who had been in arts and culture already. And so everything I have, I've learned from what came before me. So I think that's a very important part of my journey. Let's go forward. Lessons in economics. What are economics to you? To me, it's the careful management of available resources. And so you can take a moment to answer this for yourself. I understand if you want to answer that on your own time, that's cool too. But to me, economics is like not just money, but again, it's resources. So anything that we might have. So if I have a jar of peanut butter and, I had 6 people to feed with that jar of peanut butter, every single Black mother in the hood and out of the hood practices economics. She's managing resources. If you have 1 jar of peanut butter and you have to feed 6 people for a week, you have to know how to spread it. You have to know how to make sure that everybody gets some on their bread for every day, and that every day, that everybody is fed. And so you have to understand, those types of things and how they are applied in the Black community and how it's not always, like I said, as formal. And so, just think about that on your own time. We're going to move through. And I think I see something in the chat, so just let me know. Here we go. So I would love to get some lessons on repair and reparation as my third question. And so, we don't, as a people, we don't need another unit of consumption. And so when we talk about, from way back when they said they were going to give us 40 acres and a mule, which we didn't get, which they do, I think, equate to a couple $1 trillion at this point with interest. But 40 acres and a mule was not a unit of consumption, it was a unit of production. And so you can use both of those things, both the 40 acres and the mule, to continue to yield a continued good and service. And so, when you talk about, giving someone money, that has a shelf life. If they don't spend it or invest it in a way that is going to continue to, help their economic, health to grow, then, that is a unit of consumption. When you buy sneakers, sneakers are a unit of consumption. When you buy a car is a unit of consumption. When you buy a farm is a unit of production. When you buy, when you invest in that shea butter tree and you make jars of shea butter and you keep making the shea butter because the shea tree keeps growing and you keep getting paid, that is a unit of production. And so you want to make sure, when you're thinking about the creation of whatever you're doing, especially if you're looking to benefit your community in the best way, in those cooperative ways that I've outlined, then you want to be thinking about creating units of production, not just consumption. So you can consume some of the things that you produce, but some things just don't live beyond, you buying it or you wearing it, or it gets too old or it's not in style. And so you want to be definitely careful around those things. And you want to think about, what items would get us far in the development in a new co-op. And so, take a moment to answer that either in the chat or on your own time. Like, I would love, because I know everybody that's here right now has a skill. And so if you have a skill, drop it in the chat, whether it's blank, and you can answer that for yourself. I know for me, I'm really good at marketing. I'm really good at growing plants. I have over 30 plants in my home. There's one right there. And, they grow really big and strong, and I can give tips about those things, And so, if you have a skill to leverage, and you'll always, have a wealth of resource. And so we'll move forward with that. And so lesson in development, when you talk about, and it looks like the chat went off, so just let me know. But a lesson in development is, you don't need permission. I did a talk the other day that's on my website, available at AlanahNichole.com, called No Permission Needed. And I did it with a local organization here in Baltimore. But, you don't have to ask anyone to go and do these things. If you have a great idea and you want to execute on them, if you have great people that are by your side or not, then you go ahead and you do that. And I just want to make sure that I iterate those things, because a lot of people will tell you to go find someone to back you, or to find funding. You don't need that. I didn't need that when I started my fund. I was fortunate enough to get a lot of donations, from local either foundations, local fellowships that I had already been a part of, and lots of individuals. Many individuals, contributed to that. And so you don't need permission. So let's go forward. And so this is another principle that I love, is self-determination, or kujichagulia. And that means to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves in Swahili. And so this is another principle, like I said, of Kwanzaa. But again, I like to apply these things year round. And so, how do you define yourself? What are those things about you, that you can contribute to cooperative economics, or to creating a better cooperative future, for your community? And so this is another principle that I like to carry with me in my work. And so this is just a little bit of an overview. We talked a lot today. I'm glad that you guys came. I'm so glad that you guys stayed. This has been a beautiful session. I'm so thankful to any friends, and just to NBAF again for having me here, for cooperative economics, because we do got us. I hope that you feel, empowered from this. I hope that you feel like you can go forward, that you don't need permission. I hope that you take those examples, those early examples of the grandmas watching the kids. I hope that you take the examples, of the stories from Tennessee. I hope that you take those examples and you go forward in your work, feeling more confident and answering some of these questions for yourself. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, and I'll read them aloud, but question 5 is, what are some of the ways you're thinking about engaging your community with cooperative economics? Question number 6 is, what skills do you or could you leverage? Question number 7 is, what are common concerns in your community? Question number 8 is, how have folks already come together amid the COVID-19 crisis in your own community? Question number 9 is, how can you support those initiatives? So whether you're sharing or donating or you have a skill to lend. And question number 10 is, did you learn something today? So I feel like everybody should be able to answer that. So you could drop in the chat, just be like, yes, yes, I learned something today. Yes, Alanah, I learned something today. You can just say that, or you can answer any of these questions, and I would be happy to chat with you guys. I'd be happy to have you on screen or whatever you want to do. This has been amazing. I will keep this up for a few seconds. And the last slide is just, thanks for coming. You know, my name again is Alanah Nichole. I'm a Baltimore-based artist and organizer. You know, these are the ways that you can contact me. Again, this portrait is by a beautiful Black woman who lives in Australia. Her name is Harmony Miller. And so one of the ways, like I said earlier, that I've been supporting a lot of the artists, you know, in the world is just, you know, by buying their work, by sharing their work. That's, you know, such a strong thing. And so I'm going to stop the share and come into the chat to see what's happening. But you guys, let me know. This has been amazing. I'm so glad that you guys have been inspired and that you have been contributing. So definitely.